Good morning, everyone. 5 years, 10 semesters. One final battle, the design dissertation. Thesis is the culmination of learnings that we acquire over the 10 semesters. In our near future, all of us will be fighting this battle some or the other day. Today, we are here to witness the journeys and experiences of this final endeavor from the recently graduated batch of 2015-2020. This gathering is an attempt to celebrate not only the successful outcomes, but also the different processes and experiments that have led to the conclusion of their academic universe. On behalf of Academy of Architecture, I welcome you all to the second session of Thesis Symposium 2020.
So I studied a lot of cases of resettlement, and the case which I found most interesting was the case of Moshi. The Moshi site finding was a major task for me because I could find a lot of stories about dam displaced villages, but I didn't know what can I actually intervene for those people. So I took a lot of time to find the site. Like till October, I didn't had any site at all. So yeah, so the case of Moshi, the Moshi Dam was constructed in 1919, which was before independence, and at that time, total 50 villages were displaced, and 10,000 villagers had to move their houses, and obviously none of them were supporting that. So at that time, a satyagraha was launched. Which was led by Senapati Bapat, and this entire event is known as world's first anti-dam movement. So that was a key factor of my side, and this was also important to India because these were the early steps towards India's independence. And another important factor was the villagers of Moshi are known as Mavras of Moshi. So those were the Maratha warriors of Shivaji Maharaj's era. So that added another factor to this, and these were the Mavras of Moshi were the first displacement victims of India. So for creating a positive approach towards resettlement, I thought Moshi was the most appropriate site. So I chose Moshi as my site. Then there were a lot of problems at that site, that they didn't had any proper houses, the economy was lost, and there were a lot of problems. But I had to narrow it down to somewhere. So I could narrow it down to three important points. That was the identity, the economy, and the housing. And constantly throughout my entire process, I was trying to give one common solution to all of these things. So I visited the site 2 or 3 times, and 3 times actually, and I started talking to them. And when I was talking to them, they could, tell me all the stories about their ancestors fight, the stories of their ancestors, how they fought the Mughals and Sultans. But even after a century, after that dam displacement case happened, till today there is no positive case of resettlement in India, and this is like the second generation of the people who were displaced, but still their housing condition was very very poor, and currently they were working as landless laborers. And earlier they used to practice that bamboo weaving art, but since they had no platform as such, so they stopped doing that. And then I started actually looking for resources around the site. What can be the livelihood generation, the main livelihood generation point of these people. So I could find bamboo pretty easily around. So then I started thinking in the reverse manner, ki how architectural element, or maybe construction element like bamboo can be the solution for their identity, economy, and housing as well. So yeah. Then there were total 50 villages that were displaced. So I couldn't obviously go to all 50 villages like that. So this is the dam viewpoint. So so I took this Varne village as my site because this was the closest to the dam viewpoint. and I chose that as my site. And also when I visited the site, what the thing that triggered me the most, that tourists were coming here. The Mushi Dam is a very beautiful place, and when people came and they started clicking pictures of the dam, and the villagers, which were like at 5 minutes walking distance from the dam viewpoint, the tourists didn't know anything about those villagers who had literally sacrificed their livelihoods from generations for the dam. So what the thing that clicked me, how my architectural interventions can bridge the gap between these two, like how the tourists can help the villagers to find their, to make their livelihoods, and how the history and art that these people have can give back to the tourists and increase the tourism. So yeah, that's what I started doing at later stages. So my total site area was 94 acres. So all those who are dealing with larger sites, I want you guys to tell that, I want to tell you guys that you should have your master plan in place. Like it is very important for you to place all the masses on your master plan correctly, well justified, so that even if you miss on the small details, like you should not do that, but even if you miss on the smallest detail, that can be fine, but make sure your zoning is in place and your intermediate spaces are planned very well and very well justified. So my total site area was 94 acres, and my built up went to 30,000 square meter around. And my ownership, yeah, the make sure your ownership and everything is also sorted. This land was owned by Tata, who constructed the dam. So and this was reserved for future development and tourist activities. So yeah, when I came down to design program, first what I thought was important and is also important for you all guys is, you should always design what is needed for the user first, and you can always provide what you want to give them later, but make sure what the user needs is designed first. So while designing, while coming to the program, I constantly question myself what exactly the villagers need. So firstly, I was during my DD, I was just going to design the livelihood center, but after my DD jury, I came to know that with the housing conditions like that, just the livelihood center wouldn't make sense. So I designed 5 things: major zones, the livelihood center, there's this market yard, the uh, the tourist stay area, the bamboo treatment center, and the housing. So the livelihood center is planned in such a way that it was very close to the dam viewpoint, so people can know that something is happening there and they can be attracted to this. The market was planned in along the valley, so that it can create an interesting section which will enhance the market as the public space as well. The tourist stay was planned in such a way that it maximizes the dam view, and also the adventure activities can happen around it. The bamboo treatment center was planned around the existing bamboo forest, and the housing was planned around the existing Kala Bhairav temple, which was very important for the Marwar culture. So yeah, this was my site plan. This was the dam viewpoint from where the livelihood center and the market cafeteria, the tourist stay, bamboo treatment center, and this was the entire housing. Yeah, so housing, I had to plan total 118 houses. Like there were existing 118 families. So I did a prototypical housing. I did it in 4 parts, like 4 units, type A, B, C, and D, and it was in incremental way. While while doing the housing, I studied a lot of Charles Correa and Baba. I went through a lot of books to see, how it should not look like urban settlement, and I was constantly trying to make it look like a villagers. So I incorporated the ideas like eyes on the street, where villagers, they like to know how what things are going around the village, who is coming in the village, who is going where. So I tried to open up the plan a bit. So, and for individual units, I tried to maintain the idea. They had these detached toilets in their current houses. So I tried to maintain that. I gave a lot of courtyard spaces, front yard spaces, and backyard spaces to grow their own vegetable garden. And then came, like, this was the permutation combination of the units I could do, and then by multiplying and according to the contours and roads, I could finally make this plan. Then I used Wattle and Daub as my construction system, and with wooden frameworks and sloping roofs and plinths and everything as per the climate response. Yeah. So these were the unit ACA plans with veranda, front yards, which can be used as cow sheds as well. Yeah. Then I gave built-in mud furniture so that it can be adjust to the villagers' needs accordingly. Type B, which is an incremental way of type A. So if someone from type A wants to expand their family, can just build on top of type A module, can easily convert to type B. And these were the detached toilets. Type C, the larger area units. And similarly, the type B. Yeah. Then coming to livelihood center, I gave a lot of courtyards here, and according to the climate response. And in livelihood center, I divided it into the exhibition area, the workshop areas, and the working areas. So I made sure that this was my exhibition area. So I designed a entrance pavilion, so tourists can be easily attracted to this pavilion and can see what is going around this place. Then by forced circulation, I made sure everyone who is coming to this site is going through all these exhibitions of the historical information. So people won't skip that essay, and they can actually move around the exhibition area and know about these people and their sacrifices, and then move towards the workshop and the working areas. Also, in the amphitheater, I provided the amphitheater because a lot of people there still knew the Povada singing and everything. So anybody who is interested in, learning about Povada can come here and learn from them. So it's also important for you guys, if you are selecting a particular site, you go there and find the smallest detail about those sites, so you can actually incorporate all of that in your designs. You need to talk with those people. Then these are the workshop areas for the tourists. So I studied bamboo very thoroughly for this, because I had to use bamboo everywhere. So from the species, from what can be the different types of uses, bamboo can be used like weaving, jewelry, furniture products, miniature decoratives, etc. And I try to give these spaces to make it interesting for tourists as well, and the villagers as well. Then these were the working areas where the villagers can mass produce the bamboo products. So yeah, and this was the tourist stay. Also, since these were very different types of different types of functions, there was a constant struggle for me to make sure they're going into a sync. Also, they were different individually as well. So while designing, I had to keep this in constantly in my mind, that I want to design it separately as well, like the tourist stay and the livelihood center and the housing, and I had to make sure that everything goes together as well. So these were the tourist stay. For that, I designed the villas and the cottages. So in the villas, I gave maximum spaces. Also in the villas, I gave backside entry to the kitchen, so that if someone from the villagers, like women from the villages, are interested, and the tourist people want to come in and cook the home food, if they want home food, then these the women from the villages can come here, cook and go, and this can be the additional source of income for the villagers. So yeah, these were the villas and twin cottages. And the market area. So I had to provide the market area as well, because all of the mass production. So all of these go side by side. So you cannot skip any part of this. So if I was designing a livelihood center, I had to give a market area for in support of the livelihood center. So while designing, the inner circles were the original vegetable and flower market, where the backyard vegetable garden का जो भी production है, that can come here and people can buy it from there. Also, I provided this arcade kind of a thing all around the market, so those people who don't want to enter the main market can easily go around the arcade and can see the bamboo products and can buy it from there. So yeah, and then there was this cafe area where I designed, where I experimented a lot with bamboo, the bamboo structural system and the bamboo roof. This was the bamboo treatment area, because I had to give the bamboo treatment area as well, where a lot of bamboo can be treated with vertical diffusion method and everything. And this was the yard. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Prafulla. So do we have questions for Prafulla?
Yeah, I have a
Yes, sir.
question. Prafulla, very interesting work, very good background studies and details. My question is, as urban citizens and from the background where we come from and study, do we think that we try to decide for the villagers who have the actual urban aspirations? Because Moshi is so close to Pune and it's almost
Yes.
urbanized. So at times, do you think we tend to decide for them what they actually don't aspire for? What is your opinion? This is not a comment on your thesis, it's for the opinion.
I had the similar question in my internal design jury. So what I think is, means I read it somewhere that if you want to design at one particular place, you can find the oldest structure of that particular site, and you can design that structure would be the best that you can give to that particular site. And for the people who are the Mushi people were trying to get back to the history of what they had, like their identity maybe, or they had the sense of belonging in their, they lost their sense of belonging which they had earlier. So I think I tried to make that work in vernacular manner. Like I could have used concrete or anything, but I tried to use the materials which were available right there, and I tried to provide them.
Prafula, my question is not towards the use of material or choice of material, perfect choice of material. My question is about, can we not think about a neo vernacular where, because what happens is generally when we try to go vernacular, in our technicalities, we don't foresee all the technical aspects which can be actually woven in the same vernacular. Like, all the services, we need internet now, we need all those things. So somehow the sections suddenly start getting towards the 100-year-old buildings. So if we can think of the neo vernacular where the envelopes are perfectly fine to that environment and the wonderful use of bamboo as a material, but can that not be also interwoven with all the modern technologies and tools and other things available for us? That's what my question was actually. Not about the language. Language can be anything.
Okay. No, my point was to get back to the, I understand the modern technology aspect of it, but in the villages, I think we villages, first of all, I was trying to, get back the people who had left the villages because of these poor housing and everything. So I was planning
Yeah.
the reverse migration as well. So while planning that, if I give what it is already in the city, then what would it make different? What it would make. Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was trying to make village look like a village with the villages aspect. Can you understand?
I can understand that. I am from a very small village, and
Okay.
my farmer friends, who are my classmates from my primary school, are still living in that same atmosphere with which village comes from and the farming comes from. But my farmer friend has a lot of applications which are relevant to him. He knows the weather, he knows what are the rates currently. He knows when my pickup will come and pick my vegetables for the market. So all these things have changed. That is what my point was. It's not about the changing the culture, remaining in the same culture the way we have adopted the change. Can we not think on those directions slowly and steadily? Because what happens is that however best we will give as a language and the old village, हिस्ट्री है ना, हिस्ट्री बात करने के लिए बहुत अच्छा रहता है कि वी आर फ्रॉम द मराठाज एंड मावड़ाज एंड ऑल दैट, बट व्हेन इट कम्स टू livelihood and other things as architects, we need to be sensitive enough. Otherwise this planning is very interesting. So this was just a point which I wanted you to actually brood on when you'll go, because you may lead towards this direction as a practitioner also
Yeah.
if you believe in this. That's why. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Prafulla. We'll now move on to our next speaker. Prafulla, can you stop? Yeah. The next speaker for today's session is Bhagyashree Amle with her thesis titled as Design Museum at Kala Ghoda. Architecture and drama are two languages that are profound at creating an impact, evoking emotions, and engaging the user. The Design Museum introduces a drama of contrast in the Kala Ghoda precinct, using the context, history, and narrative of Watson Hotel. Design Museum can be conceived of as a discontinuous building, but a single structure nevertheless, overlapping the site's existing features and articulating new activities. I request Bhagyashree to take over the symposium.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'll just start presenting. Just let me know if you all can see.
Yeah, sure.
Can you all see?
Yes, Bhagyashree, we can see.
Okay, so I'll start with the origin of my thesis topic. So there are a lot of origins of some thesis topics could be issue based or some could be site based. So my origin was intuition based. In the sense, why did I choose drama, this language, dramaturgy? Is because I had an inclination towards it since my childhood. So I knew a lot about dramaturgy, and when I entered architecture, during orientation, I realized that there are a lot of things that overlap between architecture and drama. Like you have the setting, you have plot, you have orchestration of spaces, you have characters. So I wanted to really dive into the creating this parallelism between dramaturgy and architecture. Dramaturgy is basically orchestration of events. And that's exactly what you do in some styles of architecture where you want to not essentially dramatize it in the sense of spaces or ornamentation or like excessive ornamentation, but simple use of light, use of senses, use of phenomenology. That's what I wanted to aim at, and I wanted to create a parallelism between the field of drama and architecture. So that's what my title also says, that it's a qualitative framework of sensorial aspects for a dramatic experience of architectural space through event-based sequential narrative. Now I'll tell you what sequential narrative means. So I studied this, I'm sorry. I studied this architect called Bernard Tschumi, which my guide Mandar sir actually introduced me to his work called Manhattan Transcripts. So Tschumi talks about sequence and narrative. and he also looks at architecture through this lens. So I really liked this one quote where he said, architecture only survives where it negates the form that society expects of it. So I wanted to create a drama of contrast, so something that would contradict the current plot, the current setting, and that would be symbolic in a way that you like it could be futuristic to an extent as well if I want to create a drama of contrast. So so Shumi again dwells into deconstruction. Again, there's Daniel Libeskind and Zaha Hadid. So I didn't dive deeply into deconstruction, but some parts of it I did take into consideration when I went ahead while designing as well. So these three were so I'll talk more about my site, which is Kala Ghoda. So when I went about, so now that my research was in place, I knew that my main aim of an argument is to create this parallelism and to show that we have a lot of overlapping parts in architecture as well. So when I was looking at various sites, I was initially having difficulties into pinning down on one site, because if I want to find narratives, they can be anywhere, like let alone in Mumbai or the narratives are tremendous when it comes to architecture. But when I looked at Kala Ghoda, I I felt, according to this is my analysis, I feel like it's an opera of sort where you have like a lot of things going on, where you have Venetian, where you have Gothic, where you have Art Deco. It's as if a lot the structures are saying they're welcoming you into their narratives, and they go way beyond in time, and they're still surviving, and you feel you are in awe of those volumes, those spaces, that ornamentation. And then within Kala Ghoda, then you have this Watson Hotel, this cast iron structure, which is not necessarily following the most dramatic essence. Of course, the arcades and some elements do overlap and they have similarities, but Watson contradicted them in the sense of materiality as well. It was the first cast iron structure, and it was the archetype. So I stated it as an archetype in my thesis. So an archetype is, so this is exactly how I sort of looked at my site through the lens of drama. So I looked at Kala Ghoda precinct as a stage, and then the setting. So as I talk about a lot of, so the characters are basically actors like David Sassoon Library, or there is Jahangir Art Gallery, or the Army Navy building. So there is a certain plot. All of them have narratives. All of them are layered. And then comes Watson Hotel, which is sort of breaking this rhythm that is there in the precinct. So I wanted to intervene and wanted to take forward the drama and create a contrast. This I'll just browse through this. This is basically the past and the present. So how do I do this? How do I create this sort of drama of contrast? How do I make all this theory converted into an architectural form? So I thought of opening up the structure. It has a grid of columns, which was a challenge. And so I thought of creating these modules, and I thought of actually changing this language, design language of museums that we currently have. So if you look at there's Jahangir Art Gallery, there is NGMA in the precinct as well. But then why do another design museum in the precinct? The main aim was to look at how the spaces, how the spatial quality is there currently in our museums, and how can I change it? How can I create drama in the interior as well? So I thought of creating these overlapping units, which could be galleries, so they could move, they could, rotate, or they could be like a hinge joint, and they are moving up and down diagonally. I'll show it to you in the drawings later. So this was sort of my approach to open up the structure, to create this contrast. Again, these were a few conceptual ideas. So as I told you that I studied a lot about Bernard Shumley, and if I don't know how many of you all are aware of his, it's very famous, his Follies. So I wanted to sort of follow that direction, and I looked at these galleries, these potential galleries that would then make it to the design as Follies, and how would I conceptualize them. So there were a few ideas like suspension or movement, framed interconnection. All of these ideas were just running in my head, and I started to make models for understanding. So if my gallery, if I talk about suspension, then will it at some point of time go up and just connect to the slab of the upper floor, and will the ground floor again be like a free space when you don't need to have any exhibits on the walls? Will the inclined surfaces be used as digital walls? Like, how could they be? Even for movement, will this rotate and then interlock with the gallery beneath and create a double heighted space? So all of these ideas were running in my head to challenge or to sort of look at design museums in a different lens. So if I through drama, obviously, and Foley's was like a catalyst that helped me to sort of achieve that. So that was my exploration part. So these are views of when I was developing again a few graphics of my galleries. So for the design program, I did not narrow down on like the area, like obviously because I already had an existing site with plot and everything, but I didn't narrow down on the like this much meter square. I would have gallery A would be this much and gallery B would be that much, because it was dynamic. Everything inside it was dynamic. So my design program was also flexible. It was at a much later stage where I could, because it was more conceptual and I wanted to explore my follies more. And that's how I later on zeroed down on. So I initially started with my program as this statements what I wanted to achieve and even the aim. So that was clear. These are again events and graphics which explain the events. So here again, I sort of try to break the monotony of the language of the design museums and try to create sort of. So if you can see here, I have a sort of mechanism going on where the gallery moves and joins in with the one that is beneath. So these are again like exploration of follies. Even the facade has like a movement aspect to it. Pretty sure everybody knows Kala Ghoda, where it is. Okay, so here I divided my entire structure into layers of events, where the first layer would talk about movement, second would talk about continuation, third would talk about, the drama, then there is connectivity, then there is drama beyond the museum. So let's see what that is. I'll just show you my sections. Sorry, here. Okay, so this is one example of the gallery where you can see that at a point of time when the gallery is inclined, and also I had to take in consideration obviously the columns, the existing columns, but yes, I did get rid of a few where I needed this kinetic movement happening, but most of it has stayed as it is. So because I didn't want to remove all of those, because I thought that the challenge it wouldn't be that challenging, then it would be just very flexible to design the way I wanted to. But the grid of the columns also helped me to achieve the sizes of the galleries, the modules that I wanted. That was also a aid. So if the gallery space is inclined, the walls could be digital or the walls could exhibit things. And when it goes up, a bigger exhibition could be held at the bottom. So that was one idea. So should I just play one? So if you all look at this gallery, it will just move up when needed, and when not, it can be inclined, and these surfaces can again exhibit some things that. So again, it's a lot based on user interaction and use of space from time to time. These are the views, and also like these connections and the entire ARD detailing and I didn't want to conceal it. because it's like you are actually understanding how the drama or how the movement or how the dynamism is being created. So I wanted to keep it exposed. This is another folly sort of detail that I made, where here I have the entire detailing, all the mechanism at the top, and it rotates. So earlier it was a hinged joint, here it rotates, and then you get a double space when it collides. Both the third and fourth floor galleries collide. So these are the sections. So I really played with the volumes as well. So I didn't stick to one particular height for each floor, and it varied as per the function or the program. So one more gallery that I really wanted to do was the digital art gallery, where here there is no movement happening, but it's completely dark, and the only thing that is there, or the only light, is only through your digital screens. So that again is a different effect. And after doing my thesis, I also thought that what if these entire surfaces could be those lights, so the effect would have been greater instead of just these screens coming up. For the facade, while designing the facade, I really wanted to incorporate something digital. That is because now in the future, I think like the facades and everything, we will move towards digitization as well. So the part where I have written design museum, so the material is actually stone, but they have LEDs inside it. So what would happen is that whenever there is an artist who is exhibiting a big name, whenever there's an event, the time and the name of the artist can just be displayed, and this band would actually run on all the sides of the facade. So it will be like a continuation, and that'll so you're again cutting down the use of paper or hoardings or anything, and you're just creating a facade as a display or an calling for an event, calling people for an event. And these elements are basically when the so I wanted to create something that was climate responsive as well. So I was actually influenced by these elements, where they have sensors, where you can they are made of fabric, and they will shut when there is enough when there is a lot of harsh sunlight, and then open up when you want this ambience light. So that I detailed on later on, but I put like a thought for the facade as well, because I was really intrigued and keen on working on all the aspects, internal and external, in the through the lens of drama. So I wanted to create something that was contrasting, whether it came to materials or the design language. So this was the ARD, obviously. This is the ARD for the facade detail. So now at the top of the museum, at the top floor, there is this panorama gallery. So while designing, I was thinking, if I'm exhibiting so much in the interiors, the entire precinct is like an exhibition. The entire precinct is literally telling you a lot of stories and a lot of narratives. So I wanted to bring that, expel the drama in the exterior as well. So this actually again goes back to phenomenology and your senses. So yeah. There were different shades of colors that I used. When you walk through this gallery, you will look at the entire precinct through these colors, and these colors have a sense of emoting certain things. So I saw this one show on Netflix, where he actually asked us to shut everything, make the room dark, and then he would put up these panels, this yellow, red, blue, and the entire room would turn into that color, and take that color in and absorb that color in. So I really wanted to incorporate that element as well at the top where I am exhibiting the entire precinct as well through this gallery. This is again the detailing of the gallery. Details. And I did a small intervention behind the David Sassoon library, where I created a library extension for the museum that I was designing. So this is much more humble, and I wanted to keep it very clean and a very humble sort of approach for the library. So, yep, this is all the detailing. Hello.
Yes, thanks a
Thank you.
lot, Bhagyashree. So, do we have any questions for Bhagyashree?
Yeah, may I?
Yeah, Shruti, go ahead.
First of all, a very interesting thesis. I've been completely intrigued by the presentation. Uh, Also, I had a question regarding the models you made, which were influenced from Bernard Sumi. I wanted to ask that regarding an experience which you would call as a dramatic experience is at some extent subjective, right? Because
Yes.
there are extremisms in a way a person perceives things. So
Right.
if I perceive something as a very you could say if something is my happy place, the same place could be someone's sad place.
Right.
To vent out something, and from the same place could be my happy place. So there is a certain sense of moderateness is what uh, in those models. So I just wanted to ask you, what were the conclusions mainly uh, from your concept, that is the dramatic
Okay,
thing.
so of course it is subjective when you take a thesis which is intuition based. It becomes subjective because you talk about emotions and you talk about phenomenology. So perceptions are different. It does vary from person to person. But when I was creating these models, the one element that I really wanted to capture was awe. Whenever you look at the structure, whenever you look at the movement, since you haven't seen this kind of design language as much, at least in the precincts that I have taken. It had its own limitations, and I wanted to break that design language. So even I've kept the entire mechanism exposed. So at some point of time, if it is going, the galleries are moving, everyone will suddenly stop and will look at that. So even if someone is not like feeling like it's 100% dramatic, there'll be an element of surprise to it. So that was sort of my baseline to sort of create a different design language and create something that is radical.
Okay, okay.
Any more question?
I have one comment.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Very nicely done, Bhagyashree. The graphics are stunning. You would have expected nothing less from you. Um, um, the Your approach is also very nice. Although it takes, as the other student Shruti pointed out, there is a subjectivity in this. But I think you have taken that out of the equation by going for this, by center staging dramaturgy as the main player and the main influencer of what you are doing. So I think that is that is cleverness and well done. Uh, in contrast to what the previous student, what's her name, Prafula, she had put the user center stage. Okay, so now you've taken a, a diametrically opposite position and approach, that you take the user out of the equation as an influencer of the design, the program, and what you're doing, the design itself. I think that was it's nice to see that the awareness and the sensibility to that to this issue is good to see. That's a. It's not a question. It's a comment. So well done, well done, and all the best to you and to Prafulla as well.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Bhagyashree, I had a question that a lot of us actually fear going quite contrasting to the site in this. I mean, throughout my semesters also I faced this problem. So what was so going challenging the current conditions when Kalagoda has such strong backdrop to itself? So what was your the striking decision point when you said, "Ki, no, I have to challenge this," or what made you think about that?
So I'll tell you, this is funny because all my years, or till fourth year, even fifth year, I think sem 9, I exactly, whenever I decided on a concept, I exactly knew, okay, I know I'm going to end up doing this in the end. And Mandar sir was my guide, thesis guidance. He's seen this pattern in me. And he's like, Bhagyashree, I know you want to break this thing and you want to do something radical. I don't know why you're not doing that. He really pushed me, and he was like, even if you have a lot of ideas, and you like, visualization is something that you also need when you're doing something so radical or doing something contrasting. So he actually pushed me, and once I dived into it, now once I was married to this idea of creating this drama of contrast in this opera, and I saw there were so many possibilities to do it. There was just not one way. I could play with the facade, I could play with the interiors, I could go at the top and create this gallery. Then there was no stopping, because then you only get influenced by the kind of things. The research opens you up to a lot of things. So the research is important, and the research in the right direction is important, because I came across Bernard Shumi's work, Manhattan Transcripts and everything, because of, my guide. He actually asked me to read it, and that's what again gave me motivation to see that, yeah, architects have done that, and it may be successful, or some people might not, they have contrasting views, that's still okay. But the fact that you are going with your intuition, that's why I said that the origin of my thesis was intuition based. So it was something that I have been doing since a lot of years, the field of dramaturgy and architecture also. So once you get into the entire exploration and research stage, you get into the whole groove yourself.
Thanks a lot, Bhagyashree. Thanks a lot. We'll now move on to our next speaker. The next speaker we have is Shreya Jaiswal with her thesis titled as Prevention of Social Isolation in Urban Youth, Architecting Interactions in Student Housing, Mumbai University Kalina campus. This thesis is an attempt at revisiting and analyzing the student housing block within a university campus from the lens of social isolation. The dissertation is rooted in context of Mumbai University Kalina campus. The design can be summarized as a culmination of formal and informal activities, creating a context to facilitate interaction in the urban youth, thereby architecting spaces for meaningful engagement to facilitate a smooth transition into adulthood. I now request Shreya to take over the symposium.
Right. Hi, I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, Shreya.
Okay, great. So let me just start. Okay, are you able to see?
Not yet. Now I can.
Okay, great. So hi guys, I think I won't really be going into detailed explanation of my thesis, because I put up a link in the chat box which you all can go through. It's a 15-minute video which explains pretty much how I started, what the thesis was about, and how it ended. I really want to take this opportunity to explain to you all what were the things that went wrong, some of the experiences, and probably just highlight on the takeaways which you guys can use either in your design or in your thesis or later on in life, whenever that may be. So starting with my topic, it was prevention of social isolation in urban youth, architecting interactions in student housing, Mumbai University Kalina campus. So the first thing, of course, was, so this is basically how I'm going to be breaking up the entire presentation. The first part was about understanding what social isolation is. Thereafter, it went to the research part, which was the architectural study. The third was the design intervention, and then the detailing part of it. So, of course, I think the first thing which anyone strikes is, okay, social isolation. What is social isolation? So literally 2-3 years back when I was starting with my thesis, I had no idea. that do I really want to dwell into this? It was not such an important topic. Nobody would speak about it, and very difficult to find articles because it was more of a Western concept and not really that relevant in India. However, since COVID has happened and during COVID happened, I think a lot of us understood what isolation is. Is it different from loneliness? Is it different from depression? Does it mean the same thing? And so on and so forth. So I think the first thing first about your topic, I would really recommend that you all choose a topic from an architectural viewpoint. Don't try to think like a sociologist, like a psychologist, like a doctor or anybody else. You're an architect, and the end result has to be an architectural study and architectural intervention. So it's really important that right from the beginning you drill this into your head that I have to solve this architecturally or propose anything architecturally, and hence I'm going to take up a topic which is strictly architectural. It doesn't mean that you have to know what you're going to build, because that even I had no idea, but at least you know that, okay, fine, whatever it may be, it's eventually going to get me there. So thereafter, I basically started with understanding what are the causes. So there are 110 things which I try to summarize into these 9 basic categories, followed by, okay, what are the things that you can do to prevent it from happening? And there again, now this was the catch point for me, where I understood that architecture can only play a role in creating opportunities for contact to happen. You cannot force people to interact. That's not something which as an architect you can try to do, and you should not even think about it. So thereafter, I very specifically zoned into the youth as my user group, whom I wanted to intervene with. And I think this also came from a very personal understanding. Since I was staying in a hostel, I was staying away from my home, and I understood that, okay, fine, during school, during home, it was a very protected environment. College was also protected to an extent, but the hostel was one place where I was learning to grow up. I was becoming independent to a certain extent. And it was this kind of balance being created between a student and an adult. And I felt that is why it is a very important place where you make a platform for yourself, where you understand yourself better. You interact not only with other people, but also with yourself, and you become a better version of yourself. So thereafter, I started, dealing with, okay, what are the different typologies where I can intervene? And probably that's how I went ahead with deciding that I wanted to intervene in campus for a student housing project. So now, coming to the research aspect, I think most academics, I don't want to generalize, but generally what happens is we tend to, design is something everyone can do really well. 5 years you've been trained for it. But the research part is what you kind of tend to lag behind on. And most students have this point where you break when you have to convert that research has to get translated into your design. You just kind of lose it. Okay, it gets overwhelming, which I understand. It happens to everyone. So just few things which I would like to recommend is, first, when you do your site selection, be open to whatever is coming your way. You should follow more of these table logical, making tables, making charts, making diagrams, which will help you understand where are you starting from, what are your locations, what are the different, I'm sorry, 1 second, is everything clear?
Yeah, it is clear.
Can you just hide that bar?
Which
of
one?
sharing bar, which is seen
This
there?
one? All right.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
click on hide and
Fine.
Shreya, present
Now is it better? Yeah.
Yes, Shreya.
Okay, great. Yeah, so coming to the table, so what I did was I had these 4 sites like IIT Bombay, Mumbai University, KJ Somaiya, and Grant Medical, which I had to go ahead with. And depending on a lot of criteria, like how accessible is it, how many students are there, I wanted a campus which has multidisciplinary options, because I felt that a place which already deals with design and all, our studios are very interactive. So there are already lesser chances of feeling isolated. But in terms of a lecture where, the professor's teaching and the students are just absorbing and there's no group interaction happening, there are higher chances of feeling isolated. And that's how I went on to finalizing on Mumbai University. So the methodology which I followed was somewhat like this. I had my site options, after which I went on to 3 different branches, which you can see are like the user study, the site study, and the case studies. So user studies was involved like a lot of questionnaires, surveys, mapping. And the site study was an important aspect, because there I dealt with the building elements on my site, as well as the overall general mapping, which we've been doing for so many years. And the case study again was at 3 different levels. So I was dealing with the urban level project, which explained to me, okay, how does a university fit into the context of a city? Because it should have relevance to the city also. It's not like I'm only dealing with the people within the university campus. Then the second thing, of course, was the architectural aspect of it, that, okay, what are the elements that are coming into it? And finally, how human-centric it was in terms of program. So I had visited Lesek Mall in Ladakh, and that was one place where I realized how your everyday activities like cooking, cleaning your clothes, taking part in, gardening, these kind of activities is what actually helps you learn, become better, and feel less isolated in a lot of ways. So one thing, of course, I recommend is you have this continuous flow of thoughts, and you're going to have a lot of data on your hands when you're researching. So it's important that you keep making use of these mind maps, illustrations, diagrams, anything that's basically going to help you get it categorized in a particular order. It's just going to help you declutter and put everything down on paper. So moving on, I finally selected on my site and went about understanding what are the basic ways to access it, what is the neighborhood like. So I did my primary studies, which was like the base mapping layer, like understanding what is the figure and ground, understanding the building heights. Again, over here, people tend to do this very without understanding why are they doing it. So if you're making a figure and ground map, know why are you doing it. Are you doing it to understand the density? Are you doing it to understand the footfall? If you're talking about building condition, why are you talking about building condition? Is it because you want to demolish something? Do you feel some buildings are too old to be used? So don't just put any map without understanding why you're using that map on your sheets and your books and so on and so forth. So finally, this was again a very interesting part of my study, in which what I did was I took a printout of my site map and I distributed. I went on site and I distributed it to all the students, the faculty, staff, people who I saw coming like randomly, would go and hand them with a pen and a paper. And I used to ask them that, okay, fine, map out your way from when you enter the university campus to the time when you leave. And if you're staying on campus, then you can just part out your way as to how you travel through the day. And probably if you come out again in the evening or night. So this is what the people have done. And I was able to collect and I overlaid them on one on top of the other, through which I was able to understand, okay, what are the pathways which people are really using? So is this like an important node, or can I probably do away with it? There's already an intricate system happening here. Another interesting thing which came across to me was over here, there was not really a road. Like 2-3 places, there were no proper roads. It was just muddy, and sometimes during the monsoon, it used to be all high, tall grass, and people used to literally make a way through it. And so these things again reiterated all the things that I had studied so far in urbanism and Jan Gehl's books about how people decide the path. And so many times as an architect, probably you are not in a position to give a final picture. What you ideally could give is a 80% ready image, and then after the humans have used it, 20% will get overlaid, and then is when you finally have the image which is usable. So when you're trying to do your research, your on-site study, make sure that you interact with your users, because they're going to give you a lot of clues as to what is really needed on site. You don't necessarily just go and superimpose something that you feel should be built over there. And I realized like a lot of people do this mistake of doing interviews without having any kind of a an agenda on your mind. So don't just go and randomly start discussing, asking, have some kind of a thought base that what are you trying to find? What is it that you need to ask? So have a questionnaire ready with you. And of course, this is like a research ethic, but whenever you try or want to do a voice recording of the interview, make sure you do it with due permission and don't just start randomly recording things, because that's really not right. Again, coming to survey analysis, Google Forms. I think I've seen this to a bunch of people, that you'll just take a Google form and okay, now I've made it, so let's just start circulating it, and there it goes to the entire college and probably to mom's friends, dad's friends. So don't do that. Try and identify who is your user group, who are you designing for, what are the kind of things that you're aiming at, and then pass this Google form ahead to whoever you want to. It's ideal if you can get it done individually, like you stay with the person and ask the person to fill it in, rather than just using that random snowballing method where you're just sending it to anyone and everyone. Also, it's really nice if you can get your Google form cross-checked by at least 3 people, because what tends to happen is whenever you ask questions, you have a bias in your mind. Like when I started out with social isolation, I had this bias that it's only a bad thing, it's only negative. But that's not true. As in, when I went through my understanding of it, I realized that it can be positive as well as negative. Like it's 2 sides of the same coin. And that's how it helped me proofread, and getting removal of these biases really helped me clarify as to what I was moving ahead with. And again, now this like probably was the core of my research. So what I did was I went on my site, and for each building, important building that I could find, so one was like a lecture hall complex, one was a hostel building, another was a training building, I documented these elements. Like one of the examples that I've given here is of a corridor. So similarly, I had done this for a courtyard, for windows, for doors, and any lobby space or any courtyard spaces, dining spaces, which I felt were the points of interaction. So what I did was, as you can see in the table, I made a scale or a rating as to what is the light quality there. Is there any ventilation? What kind of a space is it? And what is the kind of interaction that is happening there? So it helped me to come up with an analysis of what are the good points about it and what are the bad points about it. And this, therefore, thereafter helped me to understand, okay, what do I really want to go ahead with? So now I again compared these with some really iconic or some good examples of what a corridor should be like. From I am Bangalore, I am Ahmedabad. I visited a few of these sites later in during my Diwali vacation to understand what is the difference happening. Why is there more interaction here? Or why is this space giving out more of a positive vibe? So these kind of inferences thereafter help me understand, okay, fine. So when I design a final housing block or a university campus, I need to make sure that my corridor is like this, or I need to make sure that it's well ventilated. I need to make sure that it's directional, or maybe it has some open spaces, where you can break out into these smaller zones. So this probably form like a really integral core of my research, which almost more or less directly translated into the design also. So I made some inferences like, okay, fine, how much time are these students spending in the hostel block? What is their connection with the city? And thereafter, I realized that, okay, fine, these kids are at a higher risk of facing isolation. So I came up with a hypothesis, which also evolved. And that's how I went on to an evolved hypothesis, in which I was able to understand that, okay, fine, I'm dealing with two things. One is obviously my programmatic layer, where I'm trying to understand what is a student housing, what do I mean by inclusivity, what I'm talking about, teenage to adulthood, what do you mean? And then second was the architectural layer, which was getting superimposed on it, which is what I would be dealing with in terms of social interaction, in terms of my elements, in terms of the building blocks which came together. So the design intervention finally is like the same program and the architectural layer, as you can see from the diagram. So I basically broke it into these 3 L's, which was the living, learning, leisure unit. And that's how I divided my program into these specific areas. Thereafter, I made a goal and some objectives, which would be helping me to quantify this goal. And one of the most important things, of course, to deal with isolation was to have interaction, was to create opportunities for meaningful interaction. So at what levels could this be done? This had to be done on interaction with self, interaction with people, interaction with the nature around me, and interaction with the built environment. And the way I could do all of this was through these pointers, of course, like connection, engagement, and permeability, and so on and so forth. So finally, this was the university campus site, and the red dotted line is, as you can see, was the plot, where I understood, okay, what is a site, climate, so on and so forth. Okay, how can I bring in more people? So I introduced a ramp, and then I also questioned the typology, as generally a housing block is looked at a very private function, and I wanted to break that the understanding of it, which is why I brought in the public and made the ground floor entirely public, and also a certain part of it which was made semi-public, semi-private, and that's how the zoning was happening. I also spoke about the node, and since the node was an important part of the city, I tried getting the neighborhood people inside. I introduced spaces for them like the workshop studios, some semi-public spaces, a seating space, a student-run cafeteria, general store, some stage space where they can have concerts and things like that. So basically the idea was integrating the public, the people in the university, the students who were day scholars and probably not hostelers, as well as the hostels, all within this one integral unit. Because the only way, one of the ways, like, you need to understand that isolation can be countered is by having this multiple interaction through various age groups, age professions, and so on and so forth. So they will have to have like a detailed plan of understanding that, okay, what are the functions, how is the spaces opening up one into one another. And another important thing which I realized was my gym, my cafeteria, my library, it did not have to necessarily be only for the hostel people. It also served, like, the integral aspect of it was to provide interaction, was to create interaction, and thereafter serve the function of a library. So I made sure that whenever I was designing, I kept reminding myself that, okay, I'm dealing with isolation, I'm dealing with interactions, and I have to make sure that every single design aspect looks into that. So then after I came up, so I'll just move on really quickly through the units. So I basically had 3 different types of units, and to each, one was a 2 sharing, 4 sharing, and a dormitory. And the reason for doing this was because I had to understand that students come from different backgrounds. And in order to make it inclusive, you have to allow for that kind of a space where they can live in groups, where they can live when they want to single, and I mean with one more person, but with the flexibility of living alone, as well as with 2 or 3 more people. And like the flexibility of space was a really important factor over here, because when you're talking about a student housing, it's something which is temporary. At the same time, it is very personal. So you need to allow for spaces to be used in multiple ways. And in by sittings, reading, leaning, standing, you have to cater to all of these things. And so many times your room will function as a party space. It'll again function as a movie screening space. It'll again function as a studying area. So you have to provide for the floor space to be maximized so that it can be used in these different manners. So another, like the most important, I think, part of my design was the central spine, which kind of brought everything together. So as it says, it was centrally located through the entire block. And it was basically a multi-junction of all the elements which I had studied in my research, which came together using the staircases, vertical surfaces, and horizontal surfaces to bring it together and have a multi-activity zone where you can have planting, you can have reading, you can have discussion, you can have stories, you have these small pause points also which are happening within the integral space itself. And these are some of the views which I used. So yeah, I think I also tried my best to move as much with volumes and with spaces as I could allow in a housing unit. And yeah, I mean, what I did was I made sure that the ground floor, as it was a public space, I tried to integrate the natural features on site as well. So there was a Nala which was running on my site, which I basically converted into a bioswale. And that became like the central meeting point for the entire hostel block on the ground floor. So thereafter, I like went into a little bit of detailing of understanding, okay, so since the facade is moving a lot about talking about the exuberance of the student lifestyle, it should even show that in a certain way. So I was trying to understand, okay, how are the windows playing a role in it? What about having some gardening plants in front of it? Maybe they could be self-watering. I need to provide a niche. I also need to make sure that sunlight is coming in enough, but not too harsh. And then using, different types of doors, which were either moving, rotating, or sliding, folding upwards, so that they could be used in a multitude of ways. And finally, so the culmination of the project came up something like this. And I was able to probably create opportunities for interaction with self, with people, with nature, and with the built environment through the use of these different elements, and also programmatic functioning and zoning of the entire site. So I would just like to end with telling you all that don't be afraid of making mistakes. It's okay. You just have to take the plunge, go for it. Enjoy the process, because at the end of the day, no matter what the outcome, I still fall back on how much I enjoy the journey. I used to literally pull my hostel friends and so many of my college juniors with me to site, because it was huge at that point and I had no idea. I was totally overwhelmed by what I was doing. But just take those small steps every day, and it's okay. I made like 100 mistakes. I've come up with so many hostel blogs which didn't work out, and it's fine. That is like process of learning. That is how you're going to grow. So trust yourself, have that faith, be as professional as you can, because remember, in your final year, you've done internship, you've come to a point where you're now ready to step out into the industry. And lastly, of course, just remember that it is just a project. No matter how much hypes it up. I mean, we have this tendency that everyone keeps saying, oh my God, thesis, last project, elimination, 5 years, ye wo. And I understand, I've been through it, but you have to remind yourself that it is only a project at the end of the day. And there are much more things in life that you're going to have to look through after your thesis is over. So just stay calm, enjoy the process, and just keep doing it. Just give it your best shot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Shreya. Do we have any questions for Shreya?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Hi, Shreya. So first of all, I really want to say that I loved how you built up to your program. It was very clear to understand right from the research to your concepts to the final program. My question pertains to the research part, where what you said was so true, that sometimes you kind of start you start with your research, and sometimes you start with your ideologies where your research lacks. But if you give your research a lot of importance, then like you said, either you sometimes you get lost with it and it doesn't really get translated into your design later on, or sometimes you get really influenced by it and then it kind of defines a lot of your design aspects. So I really want to ask you, what was your where did you stop? Like, how did you understand basically how to break away from being heavily influenced, or to understand perfectly what to take away from it? Like, it's really hard, I feel, even at this
Right, I
level.
completely agree with you on that because I can give you from my own experience. My jury got
Yeah.
done in November, and it went really well. I like everybody was super happy with it. I got great marks. All that went very nice. But suddenly the jury is over, and now I'm like, oh God, now what? I don't know what to do next. And I'm meeting 5 different people from different colleges, different fields. I'm discussing, and I'm not able to come up with anything. Okay, now what? What do I want to build? What do I want to design? So I did have that issue of not understanding where am I heading towards. And then, I mean, most of you all know Confluence happened, so that 1 month was like a complete break. I had no idea where thesis was also. And then suddenly after that got over, I was like, okay, fine, this is it. Now I need to take up this. I have to decide for myself. My thesis is up in 3 months, and there's no way I could be messing around with this. So I just followed my gut instinct. I was like, okay, I think a hostel would be a good idea, or a housing block would be a good idea to go ahead with. I was also very lucky in the sense that I spoke to one of my mentors, Chaitanya Karnik sir, and he told me that, yeah, I think a hostel is a great idea. You should definitely go ahead with it. It's an architectural block. It caters to isolation in different ways. You can treat interaction. And I just blindly followed him. So I can say that in a lot of ways, maybe that was wrong, but if you have someone who's really that experienced, who has that much of potential and is telling you that, okay, this is what you can go ahead with, you should have the trust and the faith in that person to blindly follow him, because later on in life, you're not going to have people to do that for you. You're going to have to take your own decisions. So as long as you have it, definitely go for it. Believe them, believe in yourself. And I think at the end of the day, there's also a point about where you just have to take the plunge. So when you just decide that, okay, fine, I'm going to do this, you start doing it, and automatically things start falling into place. Like now, when I look back, I feel like I made the best decision of deciding to go ahead with the student housing. Like initially, I didn't even want to get into housing, but like now that I've done the whole thing, I realized there could have been no other way. I could have made a museum, I could have made a cafe, I could have made smaller follies, but nothing could have dealt with interaction in the best possible way as a hostel did. So I think that was kind of the breaking point for me to understand that, okay, this was a great idea, and it's good that it translated into that eventually.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Shreya. Do we have any more questions? I don't think there are. So thanks a lot, Shreya. We'll now move on to our next speaker.
Yes. Thank you.
The final speaker for our Thesis Symposium 2020 is Dhrubal Gandhi with his thesis titled As Cities, which stands for Celebrating the Identity of Transitional Informal Ephemeral Spaces. Currently, Mumbai's identity is going a major upheaval from being a thriving kinetic city to becoming a formal standardized global environment of permanence. The same static architecture, which constructs the rigid, confined, and everlasting formal sector of city, is being engaged to redevelop the flexible, ephemeral, and temporal informal sector of city, thus contributing to subsequent loss of the inherent fundamental qualities of the informal in the process, which are cardinal for survival within the city. Let's get to know more about this. Dhrubal, I request you to take over. Dhrubal, you're on mute. Yep. Dhrubal, you are on mute. No, I still cannot hear you. No.
Ask him to check the headphone connector because it's muting and unmuting again.
Sorry for the technical glitch. We'll be back.
Joel, if you could connect your phone side by side, so screen sharing could happen from laptop and then you can speak from phone. 5 minutes, guys. Hello.
Yes, Dhruval, we can hear you, but there's an
Is it
echo.
echoing?
Yes.
You will mute your laptop. Laptop से आवाज आता है तो उसको बंद कर दो.
अरे लैपटॉप म्यूट ही है bro.
It's still echoing.
Hello. Is it echoing anymore?
Yes, it is. Dhruval, should I present?
Yeah, you present. I will shut my laptop.
Yeah, that would work. Is it visible?
Yes, Vedant.
Yes, it is.
Great.
Can
Great.
you hear me
Just
properly?
let me know. Yes, Dhruval, we can.
Yeah. So I'll start. If you can just zoom in into the top right where the approach and speculation is. So basically, my project was all revolving around the concept of how the city is evolving and what its identity is moving forward to. And so that was just a point of interest how what Mumbai's identity was and how it was changing. So based on that, I came to my approach. So if you see, I've tried to dissect the identity of Mumbai by dividing it into two subsequent parts, one being the formal city and one being the informal city, which brings Mumbai to its current identity of being a kinetic city. So the formal city involves all the buildings and all the architecture which is built around a more rigid or static ideology of being monumental, lasting for a long time, having rigidity in terms of space utilization and how each space is going to be used, what function should be there dedicated to that particular space. And the informal city is completely opposite and talks about the flexibility, need of survival, and what all appropriations need to be made within the space for all the changing requirements of the people to somehow try and survive within the city. But the informal city is not just that, it also involves a lot of communities, celebration, diversity, etc. So basically, when these two cities collide, it forms the kinetic city of Mumbai, which is constantly in the state of flux, and it also provides opportunities. There's a lot of diversity, culture, etc. within the kinetic city today, and this informal city especially is a part which makes the city what it is today, and the coexistence is very important for both rungs of society to somehow survive within the city. So if you look at the evolution of the city, and as I've shown in my diagram, the formal city is moving ahead and still being developed with the same idea of permanence, monumentality, luxury, authority, rigidity, etc. The same principles basically. But over time, I've seen that the informal city is also being redeveloped or evolved with the same principle of static architecture and rigid architecture. And it is trying to define each and every space for a person. It is trying to cut down on the appropriation capacity of a space. It is making people live in a certain way, which is being looked at from a top-down approach and not a bottoms-up approach. So, based on these two things evolving, the formal city is still remaining the formal city, whereas the informal city is turning into a subsequent formal city. And when these two cities combine, what we get as a result is a dead city actually, which doesn't have that much of diversity. The celebrations are not in the and they are today. How things work today. The street experience is different, and on the whole, the city becomes a monotonous place where people don't enjoy street experience. They don't have that vibrant of a city life which we have today. So basically, this uh, brought me to my concern, and it made me question how the city is evolving and what is the identity of the city and how it is changing over time, and what needs to be retained, what doesn't need to be retained. So thinking of this, I was looking at how the city is evolving on the execution phase. So looking at the informal city, if you see, the informal city the evolves in a trajectory towards basically three different streams. One is through relocation, in situ rehab, and third is upgradation. So in these three conditions, there's one common aspect which is transit. So the amount of time for which temporarily a person has to shift to a transit camp would be different for all these three scenarios. But still, this is a step which needs to be taken to get into all of this. So while thinking of where I need to intervene and what I can do with my project, I thought transit would be a very good, a very appropriate option for me. As now, what I wanted to do, as I realized, if you go a little lower, you go a little more lower, please. Can you scroll down? Hello, Vedant?
Yes, is it visible?
Yeah, so basically, my aim somewhat became, yeah, now it is. So basically, my aim somewhat became to understand what the identity of the informal city was and how a new style of architecture maybe could be created with a little bit of softer thresholds to allow appropriation, how space can be reorganized, rethought of based on what are the needs of the people. So thinking of all of that and allowing the city to retain the inherent qualities of the informal city, how an architecture can be created which allows for all of this. And the major aim on a bigger level was to celebrate the identity of the informal, to show what the informal is today and how important it is. And secondly, it was to to find in this new typology of architecture which allows for all of that. So from there, that is why I took transit as one of my options and not relocation or in situ rehab, because I didn't, because at this phase I understood that informal is very diverse and I didn't want to look at relocate and get into just one type of community or one type of a user group and giving housing possibilities or scenarios for their particular condition or occupation. I wanted to look at informal as a whole, as I wanted to celebrate the identity of the informal and not just one community or something like that. So transit was such a function where where people from all over the city come and reside for a temporary or permanent while. So basically, the idea was to cater different types of people and ever-changing people, which also brings in the concept and element of ephemerality, which is seen in the informal, which would make me somewhat showcase the idea of celebrating the identity of the informal as well. So looking at all of that, I took transit camps as my function for housing. Then coming down to my ground realities, so to go ahead with this, I firstly needed to understand and identify what the identity of the informal is. So if you zoom out a little, you will get to see that I'm showing three case studies of ground realities. out of which the first and the second one are the informal settlements, and how they are shifting to the subsequent formal city is what the ground reality in the center is. So if you look at the first one is BDD Chawls. So basically what BDD Chawls is that it was completely different. Now the idea of formal and informal is very rigidly based on if the rules are followed or no. So looking at that, under my thesis, I categorize Chawls also within the informal based on how much appropriation has happened over time due to requirements of people and uh, the need of people. So based on that, chawl is also what I got into the informal. And looking at BDD chawls have changed way too much over time because of the metal boxes which come out. Vedant, if you can zoom in onto BDD chawls, which is the first case study. 3. Yeah. So looking at this, if you see, there are a lot of different spatial conditions and different spatial edges. If you look at even the housing unit, the planning is really simple. It is just unit after unit stacked together with a 2.5 meter corridor. But the idea that the corridor is shared between all these families and the door directly opens into the corridor, and the corridor is wide enough and ventilated enough, the corridor becomes an extended space of the house, which is not seen in the redeveloped buildings these days. So basically, how I can say that is, I've seen people chat over here, people sleep also in the corridors, people store their stuff in the corridors, kids cycling around in the corridors, and so that would be like, so I would call it as an extended home, or the boundary of an extended home. So the idea of having an extended home is very common within these informal settlements. Secondly, I would like to emphasize on the massive open spaces which they have between these buildings. These open spaces are really ephemeral in terms of completely changing the ambience and requirement as and when needed. So if you look at any during any of the festivals, the street or the Maidan completely changes. In Diwali, it changes into a street market. In Holi, it changes into a play space or a recreational space for people to enjoy and celebrate their festival. During Ganpati, the Ganpatis are held there, pujas are happening, and as soon as the festival is over, everything comes back to normal, and it becomes a normal space for recreation as well. Also, it also acts as a thoroughfare between two roads. That is why the influx of people is a lot, and it's active all the time. And these kind of informal settlements are also seen to be directly connected to the public infrastructure, which helps them a lot to connect within the city, also helps their survival, and builds the idea of community where they have these spaces, people come together, they contribute in every form possible, and that's what builds a community within them. Also, one interesting thing are those metal boxes which are added as extensions. So these metal boxes, surprisingly, are about half the size of the unit, and they are extended out. Sometimes it is almost equal to the unit also, which is extended out on the first floor by adding props and all of that. But the surprising part is all these metal boxes are used differently. So if some person requires a kitchen outside and requires a more of a space in the front, in the hall or in the living room, as they have only one room, so in that condition, the kitchen is shifted out. In some conditions, the box on the outside becomes a private bedroom on the whole. In some conditions, the box on the outside becomes a storage area. So the idea of appropriation is very well understood in these kind of conditions, and this allows people to come to some solution with their requirements and needs, which cannot be seen ahead as we move on to the next one. So moving on to the next case study, I won't go on to the third case study as we are short on time. Next case study is of Ambedkar Nagar, which is basically an SRA building. So basically this SRA building, as you see, is about 20 floors high. And if you look at the internal planning of the flat as well, what happens there is a square space which is divided into two rectangles by a service core in the center. So what it does is it takes out the opportunity for a person to use the entire square space in the way he requires, because a lot of people living in these kind of conditions have very varied jobs or occupations which might require space in the house. Some might require just sleeping area in the house. So these kind of conditions and the planning with the core in the center really disrupts it and divides the space into a particular living area and a particular kitchen area. So what this does is it reduces on the amount of play the person gets to reorganize his space. Also, what can be seen is the corridors in the SRA building are again 2.5 meters wide, but they are about 30 meters long. So in this condition, having ventilation on two sides is also not enough. And being very dingy, there are barely any people seen in the corridor, which reduces the interaction exponentially between the people living on the same floor as well. So in these kind of conditions, people don't even know who their neighbors are, and they don't even want to know. Like it's a completely different scenario where there is no idea of community living. There's no idea of helping each other. So there had been a scenario during my case study where I understood that there was one person who had died in a house about 3 days back, but no one knew because they don't even interact, and the body was removed 3 days later. So basically, this is the level at which the interaction has dropped within these scenarios, just purely because of how these houses have been created or planned. Also, the social space which they get is really out of proportion, which reduces the amount of space which they can use to express their culture and build a community. Also, one more thing is that the sale components are the more profitable part of these kind of projects. So the major access to the public streets, public infrastructure, everything is provided to the sale component, whereas these projects are really they have remote access and public transport, which these guys are more suitable for and require them more, is what is cut out from them. Cut off from them. So basically, these kind of even the terraces, if you see the terraces of BDD Chol are quite active. They are used to dry things. They used to interact. Sometimes events happen there. Sometimes people sleep there. So basically, even that is a little active compared to these terraces, which are misused by youngsters and to do probably drugs, or there are various different kind of misuses which are happening on these terraces. As all around these terraces are, people don't look into this because the dead walls are caused by the sale component itself. So looking at all these things, I understood how rigidity is playing a role in changing these kind of conditions of people living in the informal settlements and how they're living today in these settlements. And so moving on from the ground realities, I understood these things, and then I thought of where I could have my transit camp, or what kind of space could it be? Should it be an insert within the city, or could it be one massive block where people from all over the city are coming in? And how the people move to these transit camps was also one of the concerns for me, as we've seen very lately, there have been some transit accommodations which are being built by MADA within the city, or there are a few policies which allow which make the developers give a number of transit accommodations to MADA, but all these transit accommodations are of the style of Ambedkar Nagar or a particular flat or something. It's not anything based on how they were living before and how they are going to live after this. So, looking at this, and also people were forced to be pushed outside the city and then getting back into the city and getting used to the lifestyle again, and the expense of living in the city is completely different. So all of these factors makes it really difficult for a person to come back to the city. So looking at this, I again come to my idea of my analysis of the city getting to a monotonous city where all the informal part of the city is being pushed out. So basically, after all of this, I understood, okay, looking at this, I would like to take a call of coming to a massive solution where I create a statement for the informal within the city. So that is why I looked at a big chunk of a mass within the city which could be used for transit accommodation. So while looking at this, I realized that the government has actually made a policy for this, where all the mill lands need to be one-third of the mill land goes for transit accommodation to MADA. So looking at this, I came to my site, which was India United Mill number 1, where I chose one-third of my site, and I analyzed it based on what kind of factors what is the expense of living in this locality, what kind of people are there, what are the activities around in and around site, and I looked at all those basic requirements. After that, I finalized my site. And after finalizing my site, if you go lower, Vedant, if you scroll down, yeah, so this was my site basically, and that's the master plan. So looking at this, I understood, okay, that there are a few things which is very basic, that these people need to be connected to the city, they need to be connected to the informal, to the public infrastructure and all of that. So basically, I wanted the site to be located in such a manner where it is directly connected to the city, it's connected to major nodes, and how all of these things could be made use of by these people to not just look at housing, but also to look at the commercial aspect and liveliness and the livelihood of these people. So, talking about all of this, there was one more concept in my mind, that what happens is people are pushed out of the city and then they cannot get back to the city because of a lot of reasons. Also, their livelihood is lost. So, what if people are not shifted to houses which are in the remote condition? What if the houses are shifted to where the people live? So, what if there are these zones which are located for transit camps within alternate or maybe every 3 wards? So what happens is, within a ward, I study, so this is an F ward, so I try to study how many buildings need to be redeveloped by MADA within this ward, how many are in the critical demolition category, and how many slums are there, and what kind of a capacity these people, what kind of capacity of slums does the ward hold. Based on that, I came to my to the understanding of how many people do I need to cater to. So looking at that, the idea was to have these transit camps and create a network of these, where all these people from various different locations, completely diverse in terms of community, also in terms of occupation, in terms of requirement, in terms of culture and everything, come together within the spot, and these become the hotspots within the city. So even when you look at the informal commerce, for example, if you look at Dada flower market, or if you look at Kurla Thakkar Bapa colony, which is a chappal market, these kind of, and Dharavi, for example, these kind of informal enterprises, actually what they do is they are something which can be made use of, and which are being made use of till certain extent by formal business establishments, to get their labor, or probably get their skills into play and come up with a product which is very cheap for them, and they can add to profit. So basically, the idea of connecting the informal within the formal, even in terms of commerce, would really make a difference, as they get a lot of opportunities, and a system, a synergy can be created, and these kind of synergies need to be created in these conditions. So what happened was, this created a really good opportunity to make a hotspot within the city, where there are multiple kinds of people come, and has given a completely, along with conference rooms, like incubators, where for connect the city part of this project, and this project could directly be a part of the city. So if you just quickly go to the master plan again once. Now I'll just basically quickly explain my design. So if you look at the master plan, the directly connected into the site, and the site provides an opportunity to create thoroughfares through it. So what happens is, once these thoroughfares are created, the person living in or dwelling in temporarily or permanently actually gets an opportunity to directly connect into the city, just the way they were living earlier. And these also provide with a lot of occupational opportunities. Now this site is in very close proximity to the Curry Road railway station. So if you look at Parel, there are a lot of such street markets, like the Lalbagh Street Market or Parel Street Market, which actually make use of these proximity with public infrastructure, to have these street markets. As people move in that direction, the kind of stuff that is sold in these locations actually cater to the user group. So looking, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but we'll have to conclude it quickly. We have a bit over time.
So looking at all of these things, the thoroughfare also acts as a street market. Going down, moving on. if you scroll down. So I'll just explain how the massing went by. So the idea was to create a really simple block of housing which can be appropriated in different ways. The fun about this, the major idea about this project was to create very simple spatial organizations, but the amount of play would be more, and the factor which changes the entire thing, which shows the identity and celebrates the identity of the informal, are the people itself and how they use these spaces. So, these so firstly, I started with the idea of an extended home, and how these spaces towards the outside and also the common spaces are seen as a space within the house. Then I created a hierarchy of different common spaces, and thirdly, I understood how I could create voids to connect things vertically and to connect these common spaces vertically, and also common spaces for a certain one particular module, and how these modules and how four modules could have a common core where a lot of interaction could be boosted by that, and also a staircase could be given in the center of these cores, revolving and connecting all these common spaces between three to four houses, to make a person move through all these common spaces shared between all people to create a proper community within the building, and a larger space shared by all to create a larger community within the entire project. So moving on, if you and the idea was, if you look at the axo which is exploded here, the concept is also that the houses could shift to another location. So if in case there's some project is some building demolishes, or there's some activity or some natural calamity where a lot of housing requirement is increased in a certain ward. So what can happen is, in all the wards where the housing requirement is less, these modules could be removed and be shifted to that one ward where it is required, and rather than people shifting to another location and losing their livelihood in the process, what if these houses are shifted there and the livelihood of people is maintained? So that was another concept, and that is how my construction strategies came into place. Everything is dry construction. There's no cement or mortar required. It's all in steel, etc. Coming down, and along with time, the density also of the project can increase. So if you look at the section, the cores extend up to 32 meters. Look, come to the section, please. So in the section, if you see, the cores end till where the maximum limit of the project is, and these housing modules increase and decrease based on the density requirement. Also, these yellow blocks which you see are a direct inspiration from the BD chairs, and how these modules should be connected to a house. If you go lower, can you go lower, Vedant? Hello, Vedant. Vedant, could you scroll down? Vedant.
I think he might be having some network issues. Please wait for a minute.
Till then, I'll just dwell onto this slide. So basically, my design is also divided into a certain modules, like the cultural module, like community module, street market module, and the residential module, where all of this comes together and creates a small settlement on the whole, where the street actually depicts a public street, and doesn't look like a street in an internal street to a project. And the cultural brings in the people within the city to the project and brings in the flux. So yeah, moving on, go lower, it's fine. So on the second component, if you go to the Axo directly, the Axo shows how this the central, so this shows kind of how three units come together into one smaller common space, how that common space looks into the common space within the building, and how these smaller corridors which jut out till the till the road and till the exterior of the building, directly look into the more larger shared spaces, and how the street market moves along the residential, and how the buffers are created between the street market and the residential, and how small pockets have been left within the street market from the POS points to reach the residential. And those kind of patterns were studied from the city, and how from these situations within the city, and they were trying to be they were recreated in this project to maintain the authenticity of being an informal settlement. Going lower, if you scroll down, yeah, so these were my housing modules, where one block, there were two types of housing modules. One would be for the slum enterprises, where the toolbox condition works best. Secondly is for anyone and everyone who comes into the project, would be just a rectangle. If you look at the out of the four pink diagrams, if you look at the one on the bottom left, that is like the basic module, which is actually nothing but a rectangle with the service block towards the end. So how they want to configure the kitchen, how they want to configure the living spaces, if they want to add into a room, everything could be changed. Apart from that, after every 3 months, probably they could add this block onto their house, which would be actually a rented block from MADA itself. So the block would be added when they leave this place, about in the next coming 3 years. That is when this block could be removed, and someone else could be using the same block later on. So with this idea, this block could actually help in a lot of conditions. For example, if you look at one option would be a tutor's house, where they require probably a bigger area to teach children. Also, the common space between three houses acts as a spillover space for whatever activity or occupation they have. So in case of a chappal making house, a person could actually spill over into this space, and that becomes the part of the extended home. Going lower, so that was the residential component. These are again some more diagrams showing that. Also, the units were flipped on every level, which created a lot of difference in massing. They had common also on the same floor, which connected different volumes visually, and even could have similar features. But events or some puja by a family, or a small marriage could also take place in the courtyard. So creating the idea of a community on the whole. Also, these terraces could be staggered, they would be overlooking. So these would provide some really good spaces for work conditions. Urban farming could take place on top, etc. Also, if you see, the staircase revolves around the courtyard. So what that does is it connects people, it connects all the common spaces with one another. It creates and boosts the interaction possibilities. Also, if you look at the windows were designed in a certain manner to try and create a personalized space for that for a person living within the house. Even the railings, etc., were trying to create interaction, etc. Going lower, if you look at the views, there are some conditions where I'm trying to show how things can change over time, how appropriations can be made. So if you look at the image on the view on the right, it shows that the central court for that building can be changed over time into a space where some puja or some festival is taking place, whereas all throughout the day, the tool houses spill over onto the courtyard. Also, how many different spaces, how many volumes can be visually connected is being seen on the view on the left side. Going lower, so then I come to the next module, which is the street market module, which has a lot of different types of shops, which are just basically rented plinths, which might have an ability to open up and become a roof, have an ability to store some to have some storage within it. Also, it might have an ability to just become a shop on the whole. So basically, all of these create a lot of permutation combinations, and based on whatever a person requires, he can rent out the shop at a very minimal fee from MADA, and this entire street could become a street market towards a railway station. So bringing in the footfall which is required for such markets. Also, any kind of different occupation could take place over here. On the right side, if you see, is the cultural node, which is actually absorbing the footfall on the street and brings in the city within it. And those spaces, the central space, could be used for Ganesh Chaturthi, where this community brings in a space and creates a festival where the entire city is looking at this festival, and can also lead to a lot of monetary generation, etc. That space has restaurants, libraries, an amphitheater, etc. Going down, the next node.
Hello. Hello. Dhruval, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry, there's some internet
Yeah.
connectivity issue or connectivity issue
No
here.
problem. We
So
can
sorry.
hear you.
Yeah, so looking at the central square becomes a junction where both the thoroughfares coming from different streets come together and move towards the street towards the railway station. So that could be a space where Sunday flea markets happen. A lot of recreation can happen between people within the same project, but different wings or different buildings come together. Also above the library, there are public spaces which are actually a skill development center, but it also doubles up as a multi-functional space during the night where weddings or events can take place, even for people from outside. From outside, as in from people outside living outside this project. Also, if you look at the community node, that's again at the junction of the project where a lot of footfall is seen, and how this node can provide for a community event, not only for people within the project, but also a community on the whole. If you look at the central courtyard, that could probably have different kind of functions happening there, probably like a langar where the community kitchen right behind it serves for that. The community kitchen throughout the week serves to a lunch home where people from outside and people from from the project come in and provide for and also make use of this facility. Community halls which become lecture spaces where certain arts or skills could be developed and taught to for people from outside the city, where all these skills are brought in from various locations all over the world and all over Mumbai. So basically, these kind of developments and these public amenities were created to bring in and connect the city within with the informal. Also, some other amenities like these are a balwadi or probably the co-working space. The co-working space would play an important role where which could be a spot for meeting of the informal commerce and the formal commerce and create synergies over time, which would boost
Dhruval,
the lifestyle of these people. Yeah, so that's it.
yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dhruval. Do we have any questions for Dhruval? I don't think there are any questions. So I'm gonna thank
All right.
everyone. Thanks a lot, Dhruval. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit.
So with this, we mark the end of our Thesis Symposium 2020 after all the three sessions. I want to thank all the speakers who are part of it. I also want to thank all the audience who attended all of these sessions. So thank you, everyone.